Alright, so now we're going to start part 2 of our lecture going over concentration. I believe it's chapter 16. Okay, so let's talk about some attentional problems. So these are pretty simple, but let's talk about external distractors first. So of course, if we're trying to focus or attend on specific cues in the environment or maybe in our performance, things outside of us might influence our ability to concentrate, such as visual distractions. So we can think of the crowds or the fans behind a basketball hoop during the free throw. There might be auditory distractions, so again, the crowd, heckling people, that kind of thing. And then lastly, gamesmanship is actually something that'll come up because a lot of times people will engage in sport or physical activity because there are these set rules, there's morals and that kind of things that are involved, and when people cheat or I don't know, act out in aggressive ways or something like that, then that can actually distract them and throw off their ability to concentrate or focus on the skills at hand. So what about internal distractors? Well, this might be like focusing or attending to things in the past, so what happened before, or maybe what's going to happen, so focusing too much on the future. There's also choking under pressure, which we're going to talk about, I think, coming up in a few slides. There's also over-analysis of body mechanics, so you could think of this as, maybe you're a golfer, and you totally slice a shot, so you start thinking over and over again, why is this happening, keep my head down, all of these little things just to produce one movement. You could also start attending to fatigue, maybe you're just getting tired. And then also, what about inadequate motivation? What if you're just really not into the game anymore? So I mentioned we would talk a bit more about choking, and it's important that we do because choking is a really what we call a pop psych term, where a lot of people feel that they know what choking is, they have an idea, right? We all kind of get it, all right? But we want to break it down a little bit further. So choking is an attentional process, so it's not just something that happens. There's actually a process that leads to impaired performance and the inability to get back on the horse or retain control over performance without some kind of outside assistance. And this is important, again, to note that it's more of a process. It's not something that just happens. So usually choking is characterized by performers exhibiting conscious step-by-step execution of skills, right? And a breakdown of that automatic behavior. And we talked about, when a skill is learned or practiced a lot, it just seems to become automatic. Now, when someone starts to choke, we start to see that they just seem to be overthinking the situation or the skill at hand. So again, choking and overanalyzing body mechanics. This is where the conscious processing hypothesis comes in, and it basically states that choking is going to happen when when skilled performers focus too much of their conscious attention, so their actual thinking on the task, as opposed to just producing the movement or letting the game flow. Okay? So according to this hypothesis, performance is going to decrease only with increased focus on several task-relevant cues. So all of a sudden, instead of just focusing on the few pertinent cues or key cues that we need to, we're focusing on every last one, especially in the body mechanics needed to produce some kind of movement. So another thing we can talk about is self-talk. Types of self-talk. So again, this is that internal monologue that you probably have. So appropriate self-talk can really help people focus on what's going on right in front of them. And it can, not always, but it can keep someone's mind from wandering. So there's really only 3 types of self-talk. There's positive, so this motivational type, negative, and then instructional. So when we're talking about positive self-talk, there's different categories we might place different statements into, so such as getting psyched up, so powerful ones, confidence boosters, I can make it, instruction, so focus on your technique. So again, not not specific to what the mechanics are for producing a movement, but just focus on this element, okay? And then anxiety control, so saying things like calm down or cool off, that kind of thing. Negative self-talk, though, also has different categories. So these are the worrying comments. Geez, I'm wrong again. Oh, I'm going to totally screw this up. Disengagement, so I can't keep going. Those kind of statements. And somatic fatigue. So again, soma being the body. So this is just saying, gosh, I'm so tired, I'm out of it, that kind of thing. And then there's also some neutral self-talk categories or statements. These are just irrelevant thoughts. You know, like you're playing a game and you see someone eating popcorn and you go, gosh, I could go for some popcorn. It has nothing to do with your sport, but it's something that just pops into your mind. So how does self-talk work? Well, it's basically blocked out into 3 different steps. So there's usually some kind of an event. So maybe you miss an important shot in tennis. Then self-talk jumps in, right? Then all of a sudden there's this internal monologue. And you might say something like, keep your eye on the ball, this match isn't over, okay? And the response is all of a sudden, usually that person's going to have better concentration, they're a little more optimistic, and they're going to be calm. They see things as still within their control. Negative self-talk is a bit different. So performers who are able to think more positively about negative events are more successful, which tends to make sense, right? But there can be this ironic processing, okay? And this is where we're trying not to perform a negative action. We're trying not to screw up, right? Don't slice the shot, okay? Don't hit it into the rough or wherever, okay? And then inadvertently, of course, because you're saying that in your mind, you produce that action, okay? So what's the link between self-talk and performance enhancement? And there's been a bunch of studies on this that basically show positive self-talk is going to improve your performance. Surprisingly, under some conditions, though, there's negative self-talk that can actually enhance your performance as well. And this is just because maybe it's going to make you more aware of some cues, of some environmental or internal cues for a better performance, okay? Then there's the type of task and most appropriate type of self-talk needed to enhance performance on that task should be determined. So remember all the different categories, all of that we just came up with? Well, there's kind of relevant self-talk to each situation that might come up, right? So if you're playing tennis and you miss a shot, kind of like that previous example, positive self-talk saying something like, you know, hey, you've got this, you're in control, that kind of thing might be useful, but saying something like focus on your serve when it was from a volley is not exactly pertinent, okay? So really just making sure that you're focusing on or keeping your self-talk relevant to the performance at hand. Another element here, they talk about it a little bit in the book chapter, but when a sports psych person works with an athlete, you should probably consider the culture or their background when we start delving into self-talk. And that's simply because in some cultures they have more of a collectivist mindset. And being self-critical is actually a way of enhancing performance. So again, refer to the book on that. They give a little bit of detail, give you some relevant research you can check out to kind of get into that a little bit more. Okay, so now we know that self-talk can be useful. Well, how do we go about creating, you know, useful or beneficial self-talk practices? Well, the first thing you should do is whatever you come up with, it should be short. It shouldn't be long and elaborate. Always use the first person and present tense, because again, we don't want to focus on the future, we don't want to focus on the past, we want to focus at the moment at hand. Just naturally, because we know there are strong links between positive self-talk and performance, make your self-talk, these little phrases, make them positive, okay? Say your phrase with meaning and attention, okay, so really focus in on it. Speak kindly to yourself, don't just belittle yourself, and then repeat the phrase often, okay? That's something you want to bring up often. Some ways that we can improve self-talk. there's this idea of thought stoppage. So I like to say, you know, when negative Nancy is out there playing tennis and she really gets into the hamster wheel thought process where she's really not getting anywhere, but she's really just hammering herself, right? We need to somehow stop that thought, stop these negatives, okay? So we need to identify the negative thought. We need to stop it, right? So we need to say, oh, this is kind of a bad thing. I need to stop this, and then we need to focus on something relevant, okay? Or switch it and make it more positive, okay? So the thinking here is identifying the negative thing, so figuring out why you're in the hamster wheel, getting out of the hamster wheel, and then focusing on a new task relevant thought, okay? So again, this is basically changing that negative thought into a positive. So how do we go about doing that? Well, here's an example. So maybe something negative like, he robbed me on that line call, the ball was definitely in. Positive, you know what, there's nothing I can really do about that. If I play well, I'm going to win anyway, right? And that's more realistic, right? The game is, yes, it does come down sometimes to one final play, but often it's built up, right? There's a lot of previous plays that lead to the end result. So it's good for the athlete to focus on the now, okay? If I keep playing well, I'll win this game. So let's talk a little bit about some effective concentration or principles of effective concentration. Basically, this study in 2004 basically said a focused state of mind requires deliberate mental effort and intentionality. So I don't think that's anything foreign to you now. In this point in the lecture, it needs to be intentional, and you need to be putting forth some effort. Okay, and what's important though is even though skilled athletes can divide their attention between two or even more concurrent actions, so multiple things going on, they can focus consciously only on one thing at a time, and it's really just this automaticity of actions and behaviors that they're able to lean on. So during peak performances, okay, athletes' minds are so focused, really, and this is important, that really the difference between what they're thinking and what they're doing is non-existent, right? Because it's just, everything just seems so automatic, okay? Athletes, though, they tend to lose their concentration when they pay attention to events and experiences, like we've mentioned a few times now, in the future or in the past, things out of their control, or maybe even things that aren't important to the performance that they're currently engaging in. Another thing here is excessive anxiety, which can undermine or really dampen optimal performances, right? Because we talked about back with anxiety that if you're really anxious, then there tends to be a narrowing of your attentional field. Okay, so maybe all of a sudden you're not paying attention to all the cues that you need to. Okay, so all of a sudden the athlete starts to focus too much on the conscious control of movement. Okay, because their attentional capacity is really become low. So what are some things we can do to improve concentration when we're out there? Okay, well, coaches can actually help with this, right? So we can actually simulate stressful or situations that demand a high amount of concentration or attention. Okay, we can do that in practices. We can also use cue words. So maybe we, as a coach, maybe we see someone who we can tell is beginning to slip into a choking stage or even beginning to lose their focus. Just start saying those key words, right? Those cue words that will get them back on track, get them back focusing on what they need to. The coach or even the sports psych person really needs to be non-judgmental, right? And the athlete can do this too, is basically trying to remove all the judgment or maybe even the negativity that comes out in their self-talk. And then lastly, this idea of establishing routines before and after some kind of event, right? So maybe you do this after every, or if you watch tennis, that's a great example, because you'll see a lot of athletes virtually after every point, they go get a towel, they wipe their face, they fix their wristbands or their sweatbands, whatever they might be, and then they clearly get back on task and focus on the next point. Okay, so they've come up with some kind of routine to deal with really any event that might come up. What else do we have here? Well, you can always come up with competition plans. So, the best way to be prepared is basically preparation. So, thinking about the future. So, what if this happens? How should I handle that? So, again, just coming up with plans, but not focusing on worst case scenarios. Practicing eye control can be good. Remember, there can be a lot of distractors in a competitive field, right? So if we're thinking about a soccer field, a baseball diamond, wherever, there's usually people watching, okay? So focusing practicing the ability to really only look at what's important can be useful, okay? Also self-monitoring, I don't think that's anything difficult. It's something we've talked about a bit. And then overlearning skills, because again, that's the idea of automaticity. So the more we practice something, the less cognitive and attentional demand it puts on us. This is just a quick attention test video. I think it's a whopping minute long, so go ahead, check this out on YouTube. It's kind of quick, kind of funny. Most of you have probably seen something like it before. But again, it's just something kind of interesting, right? Because if we're really focused on a certain task, there might be other cues or other things that we're able to not attend to. Okay? That's the end of part 2, and that'll wrap up this chapter on concentration. So make sure you do the 4-point activity. And I believe the next chapter I'll have posted sometime this coming week. All right, guys? Thank you.